Welcome, everyone. This is the webinar on the California Relief Grant Program. So again, welcome everyone. Bienvenidos a todos. This is a webinar on how to apply for a grant from the California Small Business and Nonprofit Relief Grant Program. I'm Lucy Salcido Carter, and I am the Public Policy Director of the California Association of Nonprofits, or CalNonprofits for short. With that, I want to welcome our co-host today, which is the SELA Collaborative, and in particular, and welcome to all of the organizations who are here because of the SELA Collaborative. In particular, I would like to introduce the Associate Director, Karla Fernandez. She was born and raised in Southeast LA and now works to uplift Southeast LA communities through the efforts of the collaborative. So Karla, I'm going to turn it over to you to make a few comments.
Thank you, Lucy. Good morning, everyone. As you heard, I am Karla Fernandez, Associate Director at the SELA Collaborative. We are a network of nonprofit organizations that are working together to strengthen both nonprofit capacity and increase civic engagement in Southeast LA. We're super excited to be here and to have joined forces with CalNonprofits to increase the applications and the grants for the California Small Business COVID-19 Relief Grant Program. As a lot of you have witnessed, so many of us have seen nonprofits and small businesses really support communities in need during the pandemic. And so we're hoping that everyone in the audience today can really help us get the word out to other nonprofits, to small business owners and individuals who may be eligible for this grant program. You've seen the deadlines coming up pretty quickly, but there's still time. And again, I want to give my thanks to Lucy, to Henry, to Vanessa, the CalNonprofits team for this webinar and for all of the work that you're doing to support not only your members, but other nonprofits in the community. And thank you to Sue as well for this presentation. And I'm going to hand it back to Lucy.
Great. Thank you, Karla. Okay, just some quick information about CalNonprofits before we turn it over to Sue to dig into the grant relief program information. We are a policy alliance of more than 10,000 organizations, and we advocate on behalf of the California nonprofit community. It's because of our advocacy and also the advocacy of our legislative allies that nonprofits are included in this grant program. So, we're really very excited. We've fought hard for that, as did our allies. We are also a partner in this grant program, which means that we have a portal that you can use to apply for a grant. And we will also help you with the application process. We are not the administrators of the program. We aren't making the decisions about who gets an award and who doesn't. That's Lendistry, the administering organization, but we can help you to apply for one of these grants. So with that, I want to introduce Sue Sigler, who is our program manager for the grant program. She knows more about this program than just about anyone else on the planet, I think. She will share information with you and will also weave in your questions as we go along to make sure you get the answers to those questions. Sue, over to you.
Thanks so much, Lucy, and welcome to everyone. We're glad that you're here with us today. Next slide, please. We have lots of information available about the California Relief Grant, and you can find more information for nonprofits on our website at calnonprofits.org, and small businesses can check out careliefgrant.com, where you can find links to apply, lots of information, and also webinars, multiple webinars every day and in different languages directed towards small businesses. We're going to be focusing today on the nonprofit application, but as Lucy mentioned earlier, much of the information will be applicable to small businesses as well. Next slide, please. When you visit the CalNonprofits website, you will see that blue box on the right, and the red arrow on our slide is pointing to that button that says See Our Grant Guide. When you click there, you can find webinar recordings, you can find additional information. And in particular, I'm going to be referencing today our frequently asked questions, which is actually a grant guide for nonprofits. If you take a look at that document, you can scan quickly for your eligibility for the program. It has a section on what information and documents you need to gather in order to prepare to apply, and a lot of information on how to answer the questions in the application, which isn't terribly nonprofit friendly. So a lot of people have questions, and we're going to review some of those in a moment. Additionally, this is for nonprofits and small businesses. In the FAQs, you can find out how to log back into your application to check your status anytime that you like. Next slide, please. We also want everybody to know that unfortunately there are some scam artists and fraudsters out there, and here's how to avoid interacting with them. The first thing to know is that applying for this program is completely free. If you are asked to pay for anything, that is a scam. Once you place your application, you'll receive communications from Lendistry, which is the company selected by the state of California to administer the grant program and make funding decisions. Communications will come from someone at lendistry.com. And again, Lendistry's website is careliefgrant.com. There are some other websites out there with similar but not exact spelling, so please be sure that you're interacting only with careliefgrant.com. Next slide, please. There are currently 2 funding rounds available, and we do anticipate that this will be the final opportunity to apply for this program. And we'll talk about those 2 individual rounds, but the thing to know is that they both have an end date of this Thursday, September 30th at 5 p.m. Round 8 is specifically for nonprofit arts and cultural organizations that meet certain definitions, and we're going to talk about that on our next slide. And round 9 is for any nonprofit or small business. You can be a new applicant. If you are a waitlisted applicant, your application automatically rolls over. You don't need to reapply. If you're a round 8 applicant, you may wish to consider placing an application in both round 8 and round 9 because you won't get a funding decision before the window to apply for round 9 closes. And we have a special note for those who might have applied earlier in the program and filled out the wrong form of application, meaning that a nonprofit filled out a small business form or vice versa. And if you think that might be you, if you apply, or if you don't know if that might be you, you already applied to the program, stay tuned because we're going to go over what you need to check as you monitor your application status. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, round 8 is available to nonprofit organizations that fall into select categories. Those tend to be things like performing arts, museums, historical sites, zoos, nature parks, etc. This is a list of the organizations and the NAICS codes that are eligible to apply in round 8. And we're going to talk more about those NAICS codes in a little while. Another thing to note is that the round 8 application has its own unique portal. You do not need to choose a partner, and we'll talk more about what that means, but you go directly to crgacnpo.mylendistry.com. And you can also find all of that information on the FAQs on our website. Next slide, please. If you have applied to this program before, then you are a current applicant. And you can log in to check your application status anytime you like. The instructions, again, are in the FAQs on our website. But we need to make sure that everyone knows you can only receive 1 grant from this program, regardless of what round you applied in. So if you were already funded earlier this year, you would not want to reapply because you would not be eligible for a second grant. I already mentioned that most waitlisted applications will automatically roll over to round 9. The only exception to that is if you applied in the first round for nonprofit arts and cultural organizations, and that was round 4. If you applied in round 4 and you didn't meet the eligibility criteria, you do want to go ahead and apply in round 9. And round 8 applications do not roll over to round 9. Round 8 is a special round, but as we mentioned, if you qualify for round 8, you may wish to also apply in round 9. Next slide, please.
Sue, we have a request just for you to slow down a little bit. It's so much great information, and I know the interpreter wants to capture all of it.
Sure, I'm happy to do that. Thank you, Lucy. Next, we'll look at just a recap on what we just talked about. So should you apply in round 9? You do not apply in round 9 if your status on your application says either on the wait list or awaiting selection process, and you verified that you applied on the correct application form for you, either the nonprofit application or the small business application. You should go ahead and apply in round 9 if you have used the wrong application form in the past. And we have a note on that, which is that anytime you submit a new application, if you already have one in the system, you have to use a different email address than appears on any other application you may have completed, or even if you just started one. So if you're filing multiple applications for any reason, please use a different email address on each application. First-time applicants, go ahead and apply in round 9. And as we mentioned, if you applied in round 4, but you didn't qualify and you haven't yet reapplied, go ahead and apply in round 9. And if you applied in round 8, but haven't moved to funding yet. Next slide, please. One of the most frequently asked questions that we get is, how much can I apply for? And I do want to make a note that this program is from the state of California, and it's different from the federal programs. You can still apply to this program if you've got a payroll protection program loan or PPP or EIDL. And some cities and counties have their own programs as well. You can apply for this one in addition to any COVID relief you might have received from a different government source. The amount that you can apply for depends on your annual income as it's stated on your 990 tax filing for 2019. And for small businesses, it would just be their taxes, but for nonprofits, it would be your 990. If your gross income in 2019 fell between $1,000 and $100,000, you're eligible for a grant of $5,000. If it was $100,000 to $1 million, you're eligible for a grant of $15,000. And if it was $1 million to $2.5 million, you're eligible for a grant of $25,000. And we'll also make a note that the CA Relief Grant Program is a grant, not a loan. It does not have to be repaid. A special note for nonprofit organizations that might file the shorter forms of the 990, like the postcard or the 990N. Those documents do not list your gross revenue, so you'll need an additional piece of documentation when you apply. Something like your RRF1 form from the state. If you're not familiar with that, it's filed with the California Attorney General's office, and there's a link where you can look up your own RRF1 form in the FAQs on our website. Additional acceptable documentation of your revenue from 2019 could be as simple as a financial report or a bank statement showing that you had at least $1,000 in income in 2019. Another way that this program is different is you also don't have to have employees to be able to apply. Nonprofit organizations who are all volunteers can go ahead and apply. And small businesses also includes independent contractors, sole proprietors. You don't have to be incorporated in order to make a small business application. Next slide, please. For nonprofit
Sue,
eligibility.
Can I take just a few questions, if you don't mind?
Sure.
We've got some questions with your preliminary information that I think it would be great to clear up before we move forward. So Round 9 is open to all types of organizations, but there is a revenue cap of 2.5 million. Round 8 is open to arts and cultural institutions, but does not have a revenue cap, correct?
That is correct, Lucy. Thank you for that clarification.
Okay, great. And so a nonprofit theater company, for example, it would make sense for them to apply in both rounds 8 and 9, and then but use a different email address for each round.
That is correct. And also remember, there would be two different application portals. There is one for round 8 and a different one for round 9. The application portal is where you go to start your application.
Okay. And those NACES codes that you showed us, those are the only ones that can be used to qualify as an arts or cultural institution in round 8.
That is correct.
Okay.
And,
So,
and if somebody didn't get a close look at that on the slide, that's in the FAQs on our website.
okay. And then let's see, I think there was a question in the chat. Okay, I know you're going to cover new organizations, so we'll wait on that. Let's see. So if an arts organization has gotten local grants, they're not related to this state program at all, they can still apply for this program, right?
That's right.
Okay, good. Thank you. I think that's it for now, and we'll get to some of your other questions. I think Sue's going to answer many of them.
Thank you,
Back to you.
Lucy. So for nonprofits to be eligible for this program, you have to be organized as a 501c3, C6, or C19. You can be a corporation, an unincorporated association, or a cooperative. And the key to this program is that you have to have your 990 tax return filed for 2019 with a California address. As I mentioned earlier, that tax return is how Lendistry will verify that you fall within the guidelines in order to be able to receive a grant. You have to be showing between $1,000 and $2.5 million for a round 9 application on your 990 from 2019. And as we just noted, you had to have at least $1,000 in revenue in 2019 for a round 8 application, but there is no maximum income cap. You also have to have been in operation on or before June 1st, 2019, even if you didn't receive some of your documents like your tax exemption or your incorporation papers until after that date. You can still go ahead and apply if you can show that you were in operation prior to June 1, 2019. You have to have a physical address in California, and the application cannot accept PO boxes. That poses a problem for some organizations, but what we want you to know is that Lendistry does not correspond with applicants via the US mail. The physical address is used to verify the identity or that there is an actual physical location in California associated with the application. And if your organization uses a PO box, you can simply supply a home address for a board or staff member. You have to have remained open during COVID times, or if sadly you had to close, then you have to have a clear plan for reopening. And you had to have at least $1 in qualifying expenses during the period of March 1st to December 31st, 2020. And we're going to talk about what qualifying expenses are in just a moment. A couple of other things I'll mention is that there is no narrative in this grant application. And so that makes it a lot quicker and easier for people to apply. You're not competing with other nonprofits on the basis of the merits of your program or services. Rather, if you meet the minimum qualifications, you are eligible to receive a grant. Next slide, please. I'll also mention that any one individual can apply once for a nonprofit organization and once for a small business, but you also have to use 2 different email addresses on those applications. The folks who are not eligible are departments of other organizations or programs of other organizations. Think if you're a department of a university or you're a program in a larger nonprofit that does its own grant writing. Unfortunately, it is only the entity that files the 990 that is eligible for a grant. Fiscally sponsored organizations are not eligible. Fiscal sponsors can place an application for their own organization, but cannot apply on behalf of the organizations they are sponsoring. Religious institutions have some very narrow qualifications, and we encourage folks to take a look at the FAQs on our website if, for example, you would like to apply on behalf of a church. Next slide, please. Other requirements. Every organization also has on file with the Secretary of State's office in California a form called the Statement of Information. And there's a link in the FAQ documents on our website if you'd like to check your organization's Statement of Information. The Statement of Information will list 3 principles of your organization, and they might be board members or sometimes the CEO as well. The statement will also list who is your agent for service. The person that you list as the applicant must be among those 3 principles on your Statement of Information. And they can also be listed as the agent for service, but they cannot only be listed as the agent for service on your Statement of Information. And again, there's a quick and easy link to check your statement on the FAQs on our website. And additionally, you must have filed that 2019 Form 990. Unfortunately, Lendistry does not make any exceptions to that requirement. I'll also mention that the application is done entirely online. There's no paper application. You just go online and fill it out and then provide some documents. And we're going to talk about that more in a moment. Next slide, please. Now let's
Sue,
talk
we
about.
have quite a few. Can I
Okay,
just, sorry
Lucy.
to interrupt. We've got some questions based on the information you've already shared, and I think it would be good to get to some of those. We
Great.
have a theater nonprofit that is headquartered in Houston, but they have a business license to do business in Sunnyvale, California, where their main office is. They do all their productions and showcases in California. And they believe that they have applied and been denied. So are they eligible? Also, their 990 lists as their address their Houston address, not their California one.
So that would likely be the reason that they were not eligible for funding in the past. That 990 has to show a California address, unfortunately.
Okay, thank you. And then another question about address. Another organization has a physical address that doesn't receive mail and a P.O. box that does get mail. What should they do?
They should list the physical address. Again, P.O. boxes are not acceptable on the application. And don't worry, because Lendistry communicates with applicants via email and text. They don't send anything by U.S. mail.
Okay. And then in terms of timing around the start of the organization, this person would like to know if they just started their corporation in July 2021, their C corporation, but they've been an active organization for the past 18 years. Are they eligible to apply?
They are eligible to apply, and you would need some additional documentation along with your application that shows that you were operating prior to June 1st, 2019. That kind of documentation could be if you had any contracts or agreements with other parties, if you had social media about events or programs, if you did any media interviews, that sort of thing. Anything that you can come up with that shows you were active prior to June 1st, 2019.
Okay, thank you. And then we have another question about timing. An organization that is ramped up, was planning to ramp up in 2020, but they ended up not doing any programming in 2020, and they don't have a very active 2019 to compare to. can they apply for funds that exceed what was spent in certain categories in 2019 or 2020? I know you're going to get into qualifying expenses in just a
Right.
minute.
We're going to talk about that as soon as we're done with
Okay.
our questions.
Okay, let's hold that question then. To submit an application as a nonprofit, can an organization use their EIN number, or do they have to use an individual board member or ED's social security number?
You will actually be asked for your EIN number, and you will also be asked for the social security number and birth date for the person that you name as an applicant. That's very unusual for nonprofit organizations. However, we want to talk for a moment about how that data is used. Lendistry is doing rigorous identity verification in order to avoid fraud in the program. And the applicant's birth date and social security number are not visible to Lendistry. They go directly to a company called Plaid, which provides secure transaction services for companies like Visa. Plaid will do what's called a soft credit check. It does not have anything to do with the applicant's credit. It doesn't impact the applicant's credit. It is merely done to verify identity.
Okay, and let's see, can you define fiscally sponsored?
If you are a fiscally sponsored organization, you will know that. It means that you're operating under the auspices of a larger organization who handles your accounting, and also you are included on their 990.
Okay, and then for small businesses, does it matter if the owner has a low credit score? I know this isn't a nonprofit question, but do you know the answer?
Your credit score is not relevant. Again, they're not going to be checking your credit. They're only using your data to verify your identity.
Okay, and if the organization has different individuals now than they listed on their statement of information, how do they apply? What can they do?
They have two choices. You can, as we mentioned, we have to see that applicant name appear among the three principals that are listed on your statement of information. And if those folks are no longer available to you, then you can simply go ahead and update your statement of information using the link in the FAQs. It's quick and easy, and it comes with a nominal fee, I think about $20 to update your statement.
Okay, thank you. And then another organization has an extension to file their 990 for November 15th, 2021. And then they're saying that they have a 2019 for the 990 filed. So are they still eligible to apply? I'm assuming that they mean that they've got an extension until November 15th for their 2019 990, but I'm not sure about that.
Okay. If you have your 2019 990 completed and filed, you don't need any information for the tax years after that. The 2019 is what is required. If an organization is on extension and planning to file their 2019 990 by November 15th, go ahead and apply. You do not need to provide all of your documents at the time of application. However, we don't yet know what is the final date that Lendistry will accept documents.
Okay, and just one more follow-up question from the Texas organization, Texas/California organization. They do have a California Secretary of State license. So you had said before that because their 990 lists a Houston, Texas address that they're not eligible. Does it make any difference that they have a California Secretary of State license?
I'm afraid that Lendistry is very firm on the requirement, both for a 2019 990 and that the 990 show a California address.
Okay, we have a lot of other questions, but I know you've got a lot of great information ahead, so I think we'll stop there. Thanks, Sue.
Okay, thank you, Lucy. All right, back to qualifying expenses. In order to qualify for this program, you have to have only $1 in qualifying expenses. This gets confusing for folks that are used to nonprofit accounting, because typically we look forward into the future and we say these are the programs and services we're going to provide and how much money we need to do that. This program is different. It's looking in retrospect to say, we know that many nonprofits and small businesses were impacted by COVID, and the grant amounts are not directly related to the amount of qualifying expenses that you have. You will not be asked to list your qualifying expenses in the application, but rather you will sign a form saying that you meet that qualification. So if you can find even $1 in qualifying expenses, then you are eligible for this program. Those expenses need to be between March 1st and December 31st, 2020, and they can include regular expenses like your rent, your mortgage, utilities, insurance, payroll. And the only caveat on that is that if you already used another grant source, whether it's government or private, to pay a given expense, you can't also include that as a qualifying expense for this program. That would be called double dipping. Let me give you an example. Let's say you got a PPP loan and you use that to pay your employees in September of 2020. You could not use those same payroll expenses from September as a qualifying expense for this program, but you could use your payroll from August or October of 2020 for this program. Qualifying expenses also include expenses related to operating during COVID times. So if you had to, let's say, deliver programs, you had to get a Zoom account and deliver programs that way, or if you had to purchase personal protective equipment or hand sanitizer or plexiglass, or even any other type of equipment in order to continue to operate in the COVID environment. Maybe you had to purchase laptop computers for your employees so they could work at home. All of those would be qualifying expenses for this program. And when you receive your funds, you don't need to go back and open your books from 2020 or apply them to specifically to your qualifying expenses. You can use any funds you receive from this program as general operating funds and use them any way that you wish. Next slide, please. Now we're going to talk about preparing to apply. The first thing to do is to make sure that you are using Google Chrome as your browser whenever you are accessing the application on your computer. And the application was built on this platform. And if you try to use other common browsers like Internet or Firefox, the application tends to freeze up or return errors. So please do be sure that you're working in Google Chrome as your browser. And if you have any other tech difficulties, there's lots more tech tips on our website on the FAQs. Next slide, please. The next thing you'll do is gather your documents and information for nonprofit applicants. As we've mentioned, your federal Form 990 and your articles of incorporation. The applicant will need to provide a current government issued ID with a photo, such as a driver's license or a passport. It cannot be expired. And something called the application certification form that is available both on the Lendistry website at careliefgrant.com, or there's a link to it in our FAQs. It's important to remember to fill out the one for nonprofit organizations because there's one for small business and an application certification form for nonprofits. And you're going to download that form, fill it out, and then save an electronic copy so that you can upload it when it comes time to provide your documents. You'll also need your employer identification number. As I mentioned, the personal information, social security number and date of birth for the person who's named as the applicant. And you'll be asked, what date was your organization established? If these are applicable to you, you'll also want to gather these documents. We talked about the RRF1 or other income documentation for the folks that file the short form of the 990 that doesn't show your gross revenue. If you have a certificate of organization, a fictitious name registration, which is also known as a DBA or doing business as, or if you have a government issued business license, you're going to want to have those available to provide with your application as well. Next slide, please. The next thing you'll need is your gross revenue. We talked about that. It's line 12 on the full 990, line 9 on the 990 EZ. And if you file the 990N or the postcard, you'll need that additional piece of documentation. The application also requires you to enter in your gross revenue from 2 6-month periods. And this is to show the impact of COVID on your organization. You'll want your gross revenue from all sources from April 1st to September 30th in 2019. And you're going to want that same figure for that same time period in 2020, but you don't include any government-sponsored COVID relief that you received in your 2020 figure because you'll be asked that separately on the application. So again, your gross revenue from April 1st to September 30th in 2019, and the gross revenue for the same time period in 2020 minus any other government COVID relief funds, and that could be the federal program or city or county if you received funds from those entities. Next slide, please. Now you're ready to start your application. Small businesses should go to careliefgrant.com, and nonprofits can also go there too if you'd like to view who the eligible partners are that you can choose as your application partner. And I want to talk about what an application partner is for a moment, because that terminology is a little confusing for nonprofit organizations. When we think about partnering, we think about coming together to provide a program or a service for our community. But in this case, choosing a partner simply means that you're going to use that partner's link to start your application, and that partner is going to be available to you to assist with your application or to answer your questions. If you'd like to choose CalNonprofits as your application partner, the link is showing on the screen. And don't worry if you're not writing that down, because it's also in the FAQs on our website. I want to make a special note that you do not have to be a member of CalNonprofits in order to choose CalNonprofits as your partner. And if you choose another partner, we're still here to help you. Don't hesitate to contact us with any questions that you might have. You can see that my contact information is showing on the bottom right of this slide and many others, and I'm here to assist you with your application. Just get in touch. Next slide, please. We want to talk, now you're ready to start your application. And if you are a new applicant, please don't try to set up an account before you start your application. Just go right to that, where that red arrow is pointing, and click here to apply. If you're a returning applicant, you've already placed another application, but for any reason you want to place a second one, don't try to log in with your prior email. You should also start on that purple button that says click here to apply. What happens after you enter your name and email into the application is that you're going to receive an email from Lendistry that contains a link to your application and also a temporary password. You'll use that to sign back in at a later date. Maybe if you saved your work and want to continue your application, or if you want to check your status, that's when you will use that your email address and your temporary password to log in. The first time you log in, you'll be given an opportunity to create your own password. And it's really important that you save that email where you can locate it again, because you can use it to return to your application anytime you like. Next slide, please. It's also important to know that every partner's application portal will have both the nonprofit and the small business application available. Here, the red arrow is pointing to the black bar that says Grant Program for Nonprofits. This is the application you want to start. It's grayed out on my slide here, but underneath that is a purple button that's live now that will say Apply Now. That's where a nonprofit starts their application. Small businesses should look for the blue bar that says Grant Program for For-Profits. Next slide, please. On the first page of your application, you'll be given an opportunity to see the application in other languages if you prefer. And the list here that's showing is not complete. There are many other languages available as well. And on the left side, every page of the application will have accessibility features if that's helpful to you. Next slide, please. Now we're on the actual first page of the application, and it will ask for owner details, and that gets a little confusing for nonprofits because you and I know that that nonprofits don't have owners, and Lendistry knows that as well. So the owner is your applicant, and that red arrow down on the bottom is pointing to a question that says % of ownership. Nonprofits should enter 0 into that category. Next slide, please. On the second page of the application, most of what you're seeing is self-explanatory, but you will be asked, is your organization working in one of the 4 priority areas? Those priorities are emergency food, emergency housing, childcare, and workforce development, which means job training or job placement. If you're not working in those areas, it's okay to select other. That doesn't disqualify you. There are some small set-asides for the priority areas, but plenty of other nonprofits who aren't in those priority areas have received grants. Next slide, please. And a couple of questions that we want to highlight here on this page of the application is that you'll be asked for the number of jobs retained and the number of jobs created. And you'll be asked to express those in FTEs or full-time equivalents. An example would be, let's say that I had 2 half-time employees, 1/2 + 1/2 = 1, so I would have 1 FTE. Do not count your independent contractors among your employees. They're eligible to apply on their own as small businesses. And you'll be asked how many jobs did you retain? And that is simply the number of employees that you had on December 31st, 2020. And you'll be asked how many jobs did you create? And that would be the number of, if you created any new jobs in 2020, then you would count that and you would add to it if you had any employees who were laid off and recalled in 2020. And that information is also provided in the FAQs on our website. So we're, next slide, please. On this page of the application, we're going to highlight again a couple of things that nonprofits have questions about. That arrow on the top left that's pointing down is looking at a question that says, what is your customer base? You're asked to choose B2B, which is business to business, or B2C, which is business to consumer, or both. Most nonprofit applications who are organizations who are providing services to the general public count as B2 business to consumer or B2C. On the right-hand side, those 2 arrows are pointing to questions where we've selected the answer unknown. What I want to note is that many of these questions have drop-down menus that nonprofits don't fit neatly into the selections. Don't worry about it too much. Don't overthink it. Select the answer that's closest to you or select unknown so that you can continue to move through the application, because every question on the application has to be filled in before you can submit it. And many of the questions are for data gathering purposes. They don't impact your eligibility. The other question I want to highlight on this page on the left is pointing to the NAICS code, and we saw that earlier for round 8 applicants. We know they have to fit into a certain set of codes in order to be eligible in round 8. But all nonprofits will need to provide their NAICS code. If you are a larger nonprofit, you may find that on one of the schedules on your 990, or if you've ever done government contracting, you would have had to provide one on your application. If you don't know what your code is, that's okay. If you follow that arrow all the way to the right there, you'll see a button in purple that says click here to find your code. That'll take you to a website where you can enter a few keywords about what you do, and it'll give you some suggestion of codes. If you need even more support, the US Census Bureau has a service called Dr. Nasis, and the information on how to contact them is listed in the FAQs. Next slide, please. We're getting to the last page of the application now. And on the top, that left, that red arrow is pointing to a question that asks if the nonprofit serves has at least 51% of their revenues derived from the 4 priority areas. Again, it's okay to say no. That second arrow on the left is pointing to where you enter that income information from 2019 and 2020, the 2 time periods that we talked about earlier. And it's okay if you don't show a drop in revenue in 2020 over 2019. However, priority for grants will be given to those who are showing a drop in revenue because it's presumed you were impacted by COVID. The pink boxes down below are where you enter in the list of any other government relief programs that you might have received. If you received more than one, go ahead and add those figures together and enter that into the second pink box. And then you'll also want to create a Word document where you list what programs you received money from and how much, and upload that with any of your other documents. Next slide, please. You'll see as you move through the application that you're given an opportunity to save your work and continue later. If you choose that, you'll log out of the application, wait for your temporary password email, and then use that to log back in and finish your application. We're looking right now at part 1. Part 1 is what is used to meet the application deadline. This has to be completed by Thursday at 5 o'clock. And you can always go back after the deadline to provide your documents. However, we encourage you to do that sooner so that Lendistry can process your application more quickly. That red arrow is pointing to where you'll be asked to select or type the word yes. But what's important about this pop-up is if you look at the sentence that's underlined, it tells you what type of application you filled out. If you chose the wrong application form, you need to close out of the application, start all over again, and provide a different email address than you did in this incomplete application. I'll also make a note that there's no opportunity to print out or save your work as you go through the application. So if you want to save your work, you want to take a screenshot of each page and how you entered your answers. Next slide, please. And then once your part 1 is complete, you'll see this button that says submit. Once you click submit, you cannot go back and change anything. If you do need to change something, there are instructions in the FAQs on how to do that. Next slide, please. And then what happens next is you're going to use that temporary password email to go back in and upload your documents. You'll see a list of the documents and you simply click on the one that you want to upload, and it will help you locate that document in your computer, and you can click on that file to upload. You want to choose the proper link for each document, but don't worry if you don't. Lendistry will sort that out when they're processing your application. If your document is too large to upload, there's a limit of 15 megabytes. You have 2 choices. You can either compress it or you can separate it into 2 documents and label them appropriately. For example, 990 Part 1 and 990 Part 2. And we're going to take more questions in just a moment, but next slide, please. We also want to make sure that you know how to read what you see when you log in to check your status. The arrow is pointing to a line that shows you what application you filled out. There are the codes CRG for small business, CRG NPO for nonprofit, and CRG AC NPO for the arts and cultural round 8 application. You can also see that white button that says upload documents and bank info, and that's where you'll go to provide that information. An important note for round 1 and 2 applicants, be sure to check your application code and ensure that you filled out the right application while you can still reapply by September 30th, Thursday at 5 p.m. if you filled out the wrong application and need to reapply. A note also about bank information. Lendistry does not send paper checks, nor does it do wire transfers. And so you have to provide your bank information, meaning your login credentials and your password. And that's uncomfortable for many nonprofit organizations, but it is how you receive your grant. One tip, though, is you don't need to provide that information until you know you're going to receive a grant. And we'll talk about how you know on the next slide, please. When you log in, these are the possible status messages you can see. If your application is incomplete, go ahead and complete it before Thursday at 5. Once your application is complete, you will see either a message that says on the waiting list or awaiting selection process. Selection does not mean that you were selected for a grant. It means that your application was selected for processing. Once that happens, your message will change to selected pending validations. It means that Lendistry is verifying your information. If they have any questions, they'll contact you. But if they don't have any questions, the next thing you'll see is an email from DocuSign with a grant agreement. You sign that grant agreement, and that's how you know that you're moving to funding. And that is the time to provide your banking information. And once that's all done, you'll see in closing, docs out. And we can't tell you exactly how long it will take you to get your funding. It can take several weeks. If you see a message that says not selected, that means that your application was denied for some reason. You want to contact Lendistry to find out what that reason is. And if you don't understand it or you think there's an error, you can always contact me. Next slide, please. Again, we've got plenty of resources on our website for nonprofit organizations, the FAQs, et cetera, and the careliefgrant.com website for small businesses. So let's turn back to Lucy and say, do we have more questions?
We do have a few, and some of this I think is related to information you've already shared, but it is helpful sometimes to hear it twice. Is it required to submit the statement of information form as part of the uploaded attachments?
It is not required that you submit that. Your statement of information form is public information, and Lendistry will just go to the Secretary of State website to look at it.
Okay, and then we had one applicant who did not see nonprofit under the drop down for the type of organization. Can you go over that part of the application again and what they put in there?
If you don't see nonprofit, you can either choose corporation, but that's a bit of a red flag to me that says you may not be on the nonprofit application. You may be on the small business application. So you'll want to double check that. And I know we just went over how to do that, but you can find that also in the FAQs on our website. If you're on the wrong application form, again, you need to close out, start a whole new application on the nonprofit form, and use a different email address than you already provided.
Okay, thank you. And moving to some expenses questions. Transportation expenses like car rentals and fuel to serve clients, would those be included under operating expenses?
Yes.
Okay, great. And then generally, we have some small business owners on this webinar, and one is asking, does the qualifying expense information that you gave more or less apply to small business owners as well?
It is the same requirement for small business owners. Remember, you only need $1 in qualifying expenses between March 1st and December 31st of 2020. So what I like to tell people is if you so much as bought a bottle of hand sanitizer, then you qualify.
Okay. And then somebody who works for a women's shelter is for homeless women is wondering if that would qualify as housing stability. And I would think yes.
Oh, yes, that
In that
qualifies.
question. Yes. Great. Thank you. And then do state or federal grants received to operate social programs count as part of gross income?
Yes, you would want to list all your income sources.
Okay, good. Let's see. They submitted another applicant submitted an application but did not go through CaliforniaReliefGrant.com to select a partner. What should they do?
You would not have been able to apply unless you used a partner portal. You can find out who your partner is by taking a look at that temporary email or temporary password email that you received from Lendistry, because the way that the portal addresses are constructed, it would be the name of your partner.mylendistry.com.
Okay. And then these are expenses that have already been spent, right? This is not for new programming.
Unfortunately not. I get a lot of folks who are looking for information on grants for new nonprofits. And unfortunately, as we saw, this program requires that you were in operation prior to June 1st, 2019.
Okay, and then just wanted to reiterate for nonprofits that are all volunteer, they can apply. And then they put 0 in, correct? Under number of employees?
That's right. 0 is an acceptable answer.
Okay, great. So we are just about out of time, so I think we're going to move on. We got to most of the questions, and I think a lot of them are also going to be answered in the FAQs. So let's move on to the next slide. Sue, are you good? Anything else you?
Yes, I am good here. And so I want to say thank you to Karla and to Lucy for being with us today, and also to our wonderful CalNonprofits staff and the folks who were doing closed captioning and
Yes, I'll jump in
our
there. I want to.
Spanish
Yeah, I'll jump
translation.
in
You go
there.
right ahead, Lucy.
Yes. Just wanted to thank Edna Santiso in particular for her interpretation, and also Jessica Spriggs for her closed captioning. And of our staff, I want to in particular thank our wonderful tech team, Henry Duong and Vanessa Cruz. I also want to just really encourage all of you to apply. We know that around 7,500 nonprofits have received these grants so far, totaling about $98 million. So it's really worth applying. And if you have additional questions, don't hesitate to reach out to Sue, who is awesome. Thank you, Sue. And if you have questions, more technical questions, you can go to Lendistry. So here's the information again for Sue. Again, you will get a link to the recording and a link to the slides. And before we go, let's move to the next slide. I just want to remind everybody that we are a membership organization. We can do the advocacy we do thanks to our wonderful members. There are lots of reasons to become a member of CalNonprofits. Some of them are listed here, so we hope that you will join us. And with that, I want to thank you all for being here, and thank you to our speakers again, Karla and Sue, and have a great day.
Bye, everybody.